Imagine sitting in the dark, scrolling through your phone, when a new email from your bank pops up. It's congratulating you on a brand new credit card being dispatched, one you never applied for. You check your salary account and find it drained by an unexpected hidden annual fee for that exact phantom card. By the time you try to fix it, the damage is already done. Your credit score, a number you spent years carefully building, takes a sudden dive because of a credit line you didn't even know existed. This operation ran continuously for 14 years, stretching from 2002 all the way to 2016. Facing immediate termination, ordinary employees resorted to desperate survival tactics. To keep their paychecks, they crossed severe ethical lines, routinely forging customer signatures and opening phantom accounts just to hit their quotas. It became entirely common for tellers and bankers to break down and cry right at their desks under the crushing pressure. Wells Fargo extracted a devastating double toll. They stripped their customers of financial stability while simultaneously destroying the psychological survival of their own staff. In 2008, the American financial system collapsed. Giant institutions like Lehman Brothers disappeared in a matter of days. For tellers and bankers on the floor, the stakes were absolute. Hitting the numbers meant a bonus worth up to 20% of their salary. Missing them meant the threat of immediate termination. The bank's quota architecture functioned as a ruthless mechanical system that effectively mandated fraud across the entire organization. The financial data hides a darker reality: the physical and mental breakdown of the people working the desks. This vast disparity reveals the mechanics of the crisis. The unauthorized accounts were the direct result of a ruthlessly engineered, top-down corporate incentive system. Employees who tried to report the fraud internally were silenced. Calls to the company's ethics hotline were either ignored. One wealth manager was terminated shortly after reporting the fraud in 2010, eventually winning a $5.4 million settlement. Paralyzing effective way to penalize an institution deemed too big to fail. This 14-year stretch of systemic fraud revealed a profound gap between the bank's public image and its internal reality. Imagine sitting in the dark, scrolling through your phone, when a new email from your bank pops up. It's congratulating you on a brand new credit card being dispatched, one you never applied for. You head down to your local branch to sort out the confusion. You ask the manager what's going on, and they wave it off with a smile, calling it a simple automatic account upgrade. You leave feeling confused, but the real hit comes the following month. You check your salary account and find it drained by an unexpected hidden annual fee for that exact phantom card. By the time you try to fix it, the damage is already done. Your credit score, a number you spent years carefully building, takes a sudden dive because of a credit line you didn't even know existed. When something like this happens, you might assume your identity was stolen. You'd check for a massive data leak or blame a sophisticated overseas hacker. But nobody ever hacked your personal data. You were robbed directly by the very institution you trusted to keep your money safe. The culprit was America's fourth largest bank, Wells Fargo. This operation ran continuously for 14 years, stretching from 2002 all the way to 2016. Over that decade and a half, more than 3.5 million Americans had these fake accounts secretly opened under their names. People blindly handed over their deposits because the bank spent decades cultivating an image of rock-solid reliability. They traded on a century-old reputation of safety. Fabricating 3.5 million accounts over 14 years represents a systemic breach of national financial security. So how does a major financial institution pull off a 14-year fraud? You have to look inside their white-collar offices and ask who was actually sitting at those desks, typing in customer details day after day. Look at this chart comparing customer banking behavior against required sales quotas. The engine driving this scheme was a hyper-aggressive, top-down mandate. Management handed this impossible gap down to everyday branch tellers. The instruction was absolute: hit these artificial targets or be fired. Facing immediate termination, ordinary employees resorted to desperate survival tactics. To keep their paychecks, they crossed severe ethical lines, routinely forging customer signatures and opening phantom accounts just to hit their quotas. This fraud was carried out by thousands of desperate everyday workers, weaponized by their employers' metrics. The environment inside those branches became incredibly toxic. It became entirely common for tellers and bankers to break down and cry right at their desks under the crushing pressure. The corporate stress physically manifested in the workforce. Employees frequently suffered severe panic attacks during their shifts while desperately trying to scrounge up another sale. The desperation reached horrifying extremes. One employee, pushed to the absolute edge by the daily anxiety, literally drank hand sanitizer to cope with the stress. The breaking point is perhaps best captured in a letter written directly to the bank's CEO, where a staff member described the daily workplace as a literal war zone. The author of that letter was a combat veteran who stated plainly that his time in the 1991 Gulf War caused him less stress than working at Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo extracted a devastating double toll. They stripped their customers of financial stability while simultaneously destroying the psychological survival of their own staff. For over a decade, this bank operated as a self-cannibalizing machine, actively feeding on both its loyal clients and its own workforce. And all of this destruction served an entirely hollow purpose. The millions of fake accounts and ruined credit scores existed solely to artificially inflate the bank's stock metrics and enrich a handful of top executives. Reality eventually caught up. The scheme finally unraveled in front of lawmakers, exposing the executives to public accountability and massive regulatory fallout. Looking back at the bank's historic logo, the stagecoach takes on a different meaning. For generations, it was a symbol of speed and safe passage. Now, it stands as an enduring emblem of corporate exploitation. When a financial institution decides that internal data metrics matter more than human well-being, its reputation of trust is revealed to be nothing but a predatory facade. In 2008, the American financial system collapsed. Giant institutions like Lehman Brothers disappeared in a matter of days, triggering a global panic that most banks struggled to survive. Wells Fargo did more than survive. They acquired Wachovia in the middle of the chaos, nearly doubling their size and emerging as the third largest bank in the country. That strength was built on a reputation 150 years in the making. Henry Wells and William Fargo founded the company during the 1852 gold rush, establishing a legacy of stability that lasted through over a century of economic shifts. By the time the 2008 crisis ended, Wall Street viewed Wells Fargo as a safe haven. It was the one institution that seemed too stable and too smart to fail. CEO John Stumpf was the face of this success. He projected a humble farm boy personality, earning him the title Banker of the Year. Stumpf's strategy centered on cross-selling. The idea is that the more products a customer has, like a checking account, a credit card, and a mortgage, the more revenue they generate, and the less likely they leave the bank. This strategy became a rigid mandate called 8 is great. The goal: every customer holds 8 distinct products, but the average American only uses 6. By demanding 8, they created a mathematical gap impossible to fill through standard practices. This unreachable target meant that employees were forced into a choice: fail to meet their goals, or find a way to manufacture the missing accounts. The pressure to hit these numbers came from the top down. Branch managers faced daily sales quotas, and any missed targets were simply added to the requirements for the following day. For tellers and bankers on the floor, the stakes were absolute. Hitting the numbers meant a bonus worth up to 20% of their salary. Missing them meant the threat of immediate termination. To bridge the gap between reality and their quotas, employees developed 5 specific methods that eventually generated 3.5 million fake accounts. First was sandbagging, holding on to a customer's application and only opening it on a day when the branch was struggling to meet its quota. Second, employees created fake email addresses so customers would never receive confirmation of the unauthorized accounts being opened in their names. Third, signatures were forged on credit card applications. Fourth, employees set PIN numbers to 0000 on cards the customers never requested, ensuring the accounts remained inactive and undetected. Finally, desperate workers begged their own friends and family members to open unnecessary accounts just so the employees could keep their jobs for another day. The bank's quota architecture functioned as a ruthless mechanical system that effectively mandated fraud across the entire organization. Customers were left to deal with the fallout. They began finding unexpected credit cards in their mail and seeing inexplicable fees deducted from their primary accounts for services they never signed up for. These phantom accounts carried a long-term cost. Unpaid fees on unauthorized accounts caused customers' credit scores to drop. often preventing them from qualifying for legitimate loans or mortgages years later. By using existing customer data to generate these fake accounts, the bank turned its own clients into the fuel for its false growth metrics. The financial data hides a darker reality, the physical and mental breakdown of the people working the desks. Employees reported constant panic attacks and vomiting from the stress. In one instance, a worker even drank hand sanitizer just to cope with the anxiety of the high-pressure sales environment. One employee described the shame of tricking an elderly woman into a credit card she didn't need by claiming it was a simple address update. They did it because they feared that losing their job would lead to financial ruin. The desperation was captured in a 2013 letter to the CEO. A veteran of the 1991 Gulf War wrote that they felt more stress working for Wells Fargo than they ever did during the war. When workers tried to use the internal ethics hotline fraud, their calls were ignored. Many who spoke up were quickly fired. The hierarchy forced the lowest-level workers to absorb the psychological damage and moral rot of the system, keeping the boardroom insulated from the consequences. This entire division was overseen by Carrie Tolstead. As the head of community banking, she was directly responsible for the branches where the fraud was most rampant. Documents from the Department of Justice later proved that Tolstead and other senior leaders were aware of the fraudulent sales tactics as early as 2004. They watched it happen for over a decade. As the scandal finally went public in 2016, Tolstead prepared to retire. Despite the millions of fake accounts created under her watch, she walked away with a payout of $125 million in stock and options. During Senate hearings, CEO John Stumpf promised he would review the possibility of clawing back that money, but little immediate action was taken. The corporate structure successfully insulated the executive level, ensuring that while leadership collected record payouts, the legal and psychological damage remained trapped at the bottom of the hierarchy. For over 150 years, Wells Fargo cultivated an immaculate image. They sold the American public a promise of total security, building a reputation as the country's most trusted financial institution. Then came September 8, 2016. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau hit the bank with a $185 million fine. This chart shows exactly why. Investigators uncovered 2.1 million unauthorized deposit and credit card accounts, secretly opened without customer consent. The bank immediately deployed a public defense strategy. They pointed the finger straight downward, claiming the entire crisis was the work of rogue, low-level employees. Shortly after, they fired 5,300 tellers and branch workers. But the math of that defense fails completely. It is impossible for 5,300 bottom-rung workers to spontaneously coordinate a massive multi-million account fraud. A deception of that scale requires an organized, top-down structure. The person directly in charge of the community banking division and those 5,300 fired employees was a powerful executive named Carrie Tolstead. While thousands of low-level workers lost their livelihoods and their reputations, Tolstead was permitted to quietly step down. She retired with a compensation package worth $125 million. This vast disparity reveals the mechanics of the crisis. The unauthorized accounts were the direct result of a ruthlessly engineered, top-down corporate incentive system designed to hit impossible targets at any cost. When a massive institution gets caught, its internal systems prioritize the architects of the fraud. The machinery protects the executives at the top, while sacrificing its most vulnerable participants to absorb the public fallout. The executives knew exactly what was happening long before 2016. Back in December 2013, the Los Angeles Times published an investigative report exposing the bank's extreme pressure cooker sales culture as an open secret. The corporate response was entirely cosmetic. In 2014, they organized internal ethics workshops telling employees to stop creating fake accounts, but they refused to lower the grueling daily sales quotas that were causing the behavior. Employees who tried to report the fraud internally were silenced. Calls to the company's ethics hotline were either ignored or resulted in the whistleblower being fired. One wealth manager was terminated shortly after reporting the fraud in 2010, eventually winning a $5.4 million settlement. The psychological toll on the floor was severe. One employee, a military veteran, explicitly wrote to the CEO stating he experienced less stress serving in the 1991 Gulf War than he did trying to survive Wells Fargo's daily quotas. The corporate machine actively weaponized its human resources and ethics departments to punish honesty. They enforced total silence to keep the profitable, fraudulent metrics flowing upward. By September 2016, the regulatory fine evolved into a nationally televised spectacle inside the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. Senator Elizabeth Warren used her time to systematically dismantle CEO John Stumpf's attempt to blame the bottom-rung workers for the crisis. She laid out the financial reality of his tenure, pointing out that Stumpf had personally benefited by over $200 million while the fraudulent incentive system he designed was running. Warren stripped away the corporate framing entirely. She declared his actions were not cross-selling strategies or accidental fraud. She called it theft and demanded he face a criminal investigation and return the money. That hearing broke the corporate shield. It translated complex banking violations into a clear public trial of extreme greed, forcing the executives to answer for the system they built. As federal investigations dug deeper, the initial estimate was shattered. The final count swelled to a staggering 3.5 million fake accounts. While customers lost millions in fees, the structural damage was hidden. Unauthorized credit applications triggered hard inquiries, directly dragging down their score. Those lowered scores dictated the financial realities of millions of people. Customers were suddenly denied home mortgages, forced into punitive high-interest car loans, and rejected during apartment background checks. A corporate victimless crime is a complete myth. To satisfy arbitrary internal metrics, the bank permanently sabotaged the financial stability of everyday citizens. The personal fallout eventually caught up to leadership. CEO John Stumpf resigned, faced a $17.5 million fine, and received a lifetime banking ban. Carrie Tolstead faced severe penalties of her own. She was hit with SEC civil fines, a lifetime banking ban, and pleaded guilty to a criminal charge of obstructing a bank examination, opening the possibility of prison time. The severity of the deception pushed the scandal to the highest levels of national politics, triggering criminal investigations initiated by then California Attorney General Kamala Harris. Ultimately, Wells Fargo paid a historic $3 billion settlement directly to the Department of Justice and the SEC. Yet, while individual bans and billions in fines capture headlines, they fail to undo the compounding systemic damage inflicted on the public over 14 years. In February 2018, the Federal Reserve deployed a regulatory weapon that bypassed standard financial penalties entirely. This graph illustrates the asset cap, a strict ceiling forbidding Wells Fargo from growing assets beyond $1.95 trillion, freezing their expansion. The penalty was agonizing. While competitors like JP Morgan's soared, Wells Fargo remained paralyzed for 7 years until 2025. Cash fines are easily absorbed as the cost of doing business. Paralyze an effective way to penalize an institution deemed too big to fail. In 2017, the bank quietly offered to rehire 1,000 of the workers it had wrongfully terminated or who had quit in protest, a silent admission that the system forced them into an impossible choice. But rehiring someone does not erase a multi-year gap on their resume. Just like a $40 check cannot repair a ruined credit score, the scars remain. Aggressive sales quotas provided the engine for this deception. When keeping a job depends on hitting impossible targets, fraud becomes a predictable outcome of the system itself. This 14-year stretch of systemic fraud revealed a profound gap between the bank's public image and its internal reality. Ultimately, a reputation for security is not a historical guarantee. It is a daily choice maintained through a company's actions.